Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for this webinar is State of the U.S. Energy Storage Industry 2016 in Review. We have two guest speakers with us from GTM Research who will be presenting their findings. This webinar is a presentation of the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, also known as STAP. STAP is managed by the Clean Energy States Alliance, known as CESA for short, and STAP is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy and Sandia National Laboratories. Our host for this webinar will be STAP Project Director Todd Olinsky-Paul. Before we pass it over to Todd, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have two options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can call in using a telephone, or you can connect using your computer mic and speakers. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing your questions into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will read through your questions as they come in, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of our presentation as time allows. So please do type your question in as you think of it. Don't wait until the end of the webinar to submit your questions. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. You'll find a recording of this webinar as well as all of our previous webinars for the STAP project archived on our website at cesa.org/webinars. And we will also send all of the attendees for this webinar a follow-up email within about 24 hours with a link to the webinar slides and recording. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Todd Olinsky-Paul.
Thanks, Samantha. And you could go ahead and advance the slide. Welcome everyone to the webinar. This is another in our series of STAP webinars, and I'd like to do a brief introduction of CESA and STAP before introducing our speakers. And so I'll start by thanking Dr. Emery Zook of U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Electricity, and Dan Borneo of Sandia National Laboratories, who support our energy storage work. So next slide, please. So this STAP program that we speak of is a program that we administer under contract with Sandia National Laboratories. It's funded by US DOE, and it's essentially a program wherein we promote and support the deployment of energy storage, and specifically jointly supported energy storage projects. And when I say jointly supported, I mean generally either state supported or municipally supported projects that are also supported by DOE and the National Lab. So we kind of help to put those projects together and shepherd them through the development process. And as you can see by the map, we have worked with states all over the country on projects, and there's a whole bunch of information on those. If you want to go to our website, we have all kinds of, not just webinars, but also case studies and reports and so forth. Next slide, please. In case you're watching this webinar on Vimeo or somebody has sent you a link to it and you would like to be informed of future webinars so that you can join us live for those webinars, this is a screenshot of our STAP webpage. There's a big red circle there around the sign up button for our STAP mailing list. You can get on the list and we'll send you notifications of future webinars and other information. Also on the left-hand menu, there's a little red arrow pointing to the link to our webinar archive. And as I said, all this is being recorded. All of our webinars that we do are recorded and archived, and you can watch those at any time going back, I think, through 2012. Okay, next page, please. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have with us today two analysts from GTM Research. We have Brett Simon, an energy storage analyst, focusing on both U.S. and international behind-the-meter energy storage markets, and he holds a Master of Science degree in the Sustainable Systems Systems from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment, as well as a bachelor's degree in mathematics and environmental studies from New York University. And we also have Dan Finn-Foley, a senior analyst at GTM's energy storage team. And he focuses on utility scale storage, so we have both utility and smaller distributed systems represented here. Dan previously worked as a senior consultant with DNV GL, where he focused on competitive energy markets and the intersection of emerging energy business strategies within the broader evolving technological and regulatory environment. Prior to that, he worked with Navigant Consulting and the Department of Energy, and he holds a Master's of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering degree from the University of Massachusetts Amherst Wind Energy Center, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Physics from Brown University. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. I just want to remind everybody that we will take as many questions as we can after the presentation is over. We're going to try to leave plenty of time for that. At this point, we do have a large number of attendees, so please don't wait till the end. If you hear something or see something that you have a question about or a comment about, just go ahead and type it in, and that way I can be prepared to start asking questions of our panelists as soon as the presentation is over. So with that, I will turn it over to Brett and Dan.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you for that great introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Brett Simon, and as Todd mentioned, I'm an energy storage analyst at GTM Research, and I'll be handling the first half of this presentation today. So first, a little bit of background about GTM for those who may not be aware of it. GTM is a market analysis and consulting company as well as an events and online media company. So we have three main business practices. The first is our news and online, which a lot of you I'm sure are familiar with greentechmedia.com, where we have a lot of wonderful articles as well as different webinars and podcasts like The Interchange and the Energy Gang. Secondly, we have our research practice, of which Dan and I are a part. So as well as the energy storage team, we also have teams focused on solar as well as grid edge. And thirdly, we have an events practice that organizes different conferences throughout the year, and there are several very interesting ones coming up, and you can go to our website to find out more if you're interested. So today, really, Dan and I are going to talk about some recent trends in the U.S. energy storage market with a focus on the end of the year 2016. And I'd like to preface by mentioning that we're actually in the process of finalizing our deployment numbers for the year 2016. So any deployment numbers that you'll be seeing will only be through Q3 of 2016. However, actually, at the beginning of March, we will be releasing our full report with the deployment data from 2016. Nevertheless, today we're going to talk about some important policy trends from 2016, as well as some interesting activities in the vendor landscape, and then kind of close everything off with a discussion of where we see the market going over the next couple of years. So let's start off talking about some of the deployment trends that we've seen recently in the U.S. energy storage market. Initially looking at Q3 2016, somewhat of an interesting trend we noticed is that the utility scale deployments were actually down fairly significantly, not just quarter over quarter, but also year after year. And in fact, Q3 2016 was the first time that there were no projects greater than 1 megawatt that came online since Q2 of 2014. And there's a few reasons behind that. One of the big ones is that historically the PJM market has been the major utility scale storage market, but at the end of 2015 there was a cap put on the Regulation D, or fast responding frequency regulation product in PJM. And as a result of that cap, there was a great decline in the energy storage market. However, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the Aliso Canyon procurements, which are seeing some longer duration energy storage projects coming online through the end of last year and the beginning of this year in California. And Dan's going to talk in a little bit more detail about Aliso Canyon in a moment. So even though Q3 2016 was down, finishing out the year of 2016, we have seen some larger projects that have come online at utility scale. Shifting to the behind-the-meter segment, we saw an increase, a slight increase year over year, but nevertheless, the behind-the-meter segment continues to grow for a number of reasons. Thinking about the behind-the-meter market, we segment it into two pieces, which GTM terms the residential, which is all of your storage that's installed in homes, and then also non-residential, which includes your commercial, industrial, and military type of customers. On the non-residential side, we see customers increasingly looking to deploy storage for what's known as demand charge management or demand charge reduction, which involves deploying storage to shave peak demand charges on a bill. And actually, GTM at the beginning of 2016 did an in-depth study looking at demand charges and the increasing viability of deploying storage for this value stream. As a result, looking ahead, we'll be seeing more and more C&I storage come online for that value stream. And additionally, we're also seeing C&I storage getting increasingly deployed for customer resiliency, as well as the beginning of utility procurements for aggregated storage systems to supply grid services, much of it coming from the non-residential side, but also some from the residential side as well. In terms of residential trends, the market is really still in an early adopter phase. Most of the purchases now are done for emotional rather than economic reasons. It's customers who want a system for backup, or that's kind of an interesting, cool toy, or for increased energy independence as they see it. Nevertheless, the economics continue to improve for these systems, and we will see increased viability for these systems, especially as rules like net metering change, which I'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes. Additionally, when you're thinking about energy storage, you have to think both about the megawatt capacity as well as the megawatt hour capacity of these systems. So on the previous slide, I was showing some deployment trends over some previous Q3s with in regards to megawatt terms, but here we can see a breakdown in terms of megawatt hours, which is the energy capacity of these systems. And historically, again, the utility scale market has seen a much lower megawatt hour or megawatt hour ratio, given that the systems deployed for the PJM fast frequency regulation market were generally systems that had a discharge duration of 15 to 30 minutes. But going forward, we're seeing an increasing number of systems that are longer duration. So for instance, those Aliso Canyon projects I mentioned in California are 4-hour projects. So looking ahead, we'll be seeing an increase in the average discharge duration utility scale. Behind the meter, generally discharge durations are more on the order of 1 to 2 hours for the C&I market, given needs around demand charge management, which usually is assessed on a 30-minute basis. And then for the residential market, again, we're seeing usually 2+ hours, given that customers generally want these systems for purposes such as resiliency. So thinking about what actual markets we've seen as the largest markets to date, again, noting that these deployment numbers are through Q3 2016. Looking at the utility scale market, I already mentioned PJM has historically been the biggest because of that opportunity in the frequency regulation market. However, again, with these Aliso Canyon projects coming online, we'll be seeing a much greater share coming from California in the not too distant future. Additionally, given the fact that AB 2514, the energy storage mandate in California, we'll also be seeing those projects increasingly come online over the next few years. So the utility scale market in California is really on the cusp of picking up. On the behind the meter side, the non-residential segment is heavily dominated by California. And one of the really big reasons for that is the SGIP program, or the Self-Generation Incentive Program, whereby customers can actually get a credit for installing energy storage systems. And that's really driven the California market and led it to be far and away the largest non-residential market in the U.S. today. In terms of residential, we, again, California is one of the major markets, but recently we've seen a trend where storage is getting deployed in what you might call non-traditional markets, so beyond places like California, Hawaii, and Arizona, where historically there have been more deployments. And GTM tracks 8 individual markets in depth, and we lump all the others into an all others category. So individually, those other markets are quite small, but when taken together collectively, they are the largest. They comprise the largest amount of residential deployments. And again, this doesn't speak to necessarily saying that these markets are seeing economic viability for storage, more so that customers across the U.S. are increasingly getting interested in storage, and we're still seeing these early adopters deploy systems today. So technology is often, talked about a lot when it comes to energy storage market, given that there are multiple different types of technologies that you can deploy. And far and away, over the last few quarters, lithium-ion batteries have dominated the market, and especially, this domination, at least for the short term, is expected to continue with the Aliso Canyon projects. Again, a lot of those are lithium-ion based. There are other technologies that also are seeing deployment. For instance, lead acid still sees a good amount of interest for deployments for either backup power or off-grid applications. There's a suite of emerging technologies too. Flow batteries are increasingly under discussion, though to date, deployments of them are still quite low, particularly compared to other technologies. All right, so now I'd like to talk a little bit about some recent market developments and market drivers. So the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017 saw quite a bit of interesting M&A activity, so mergers and acquisitions activity going on related to energy storage. So if we look to May of 2016, Engie, which is a French-based utility, acquired an 80% stake in Green Charge Networks, which is an energy storage developer. And we also saw Doosan, which is a large technology conglomerate based in South Korea, acquire software vendor One Energy Systems, which was renamed Doosan Gridtech. Thirdly, we saw the large oil and gas company Total acquire battery vendor STAP, which to date was the first $1 billion plus acquisition of a battery vendor. So definitely a really exciting story there. And the deal closed in July of 2016. And then one that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about is the acquisition of Solar City by Tesla. And this really speaks to more of a long-term goal of Tesla becoming a kind of a one-stop shop for clean energy solutions, including energy storage, solar PV, as well as electric vehicles. And that was a $2.6 billion deal, and was approved in November 2016 by shareholders of the companies. And then more recently, I include the last two, even though they happen to be in 2016, just because they're so recent, and I felt that they were interesting to be sure to include so that everyone's aware. Geothermal developer Ormat acquired energy management software vendor Veridity Energy, and the acquisition is expected to close in the next couple of months. And NL Green Power, which is a renewable energy developer based in Europe, acquired Demand Energy, who's a storage developer with an internal software package, also announced in 2017. And the terms of this acquisition were not disclosed, but an interesting thing is here that this, kind of, if you look at all these together, there's been, an interesting trend of companies in the storage space that have an internal software capability actually getting acquired by some of these larger developers or utilities in recent weeks and months. So last thing I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to Dan are some recent policy developments. And I'm not going to get too into the weeds of any of the specifics here, but I'd like to talk about some of the high-level trends and some of the interesting policies we saw in 2016. So one that's definitely interesting for the behind-the-meter segment are some storage procurements that went on. So we had the Preferred Resources pilot in Southern California Edison territory, and we also had the demand response auction mechanism in California, which saw behind-the-meter storage procurement awards, as well as the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program in New York City, where energy storage and other resources were deployed to defer the need for a new substation. In Massachusetts, we started to see the groundwork being laid for a new storage market. I'm sure a lot of you are aware and probably read through the wonderful State of Charge study that came out in late 2016. and that really, was an in-depth analysis looking at the potential for energy storage to serve multiple value streams across different segments in Massachusetts going forward. And using the results of that study, the Massachusetts DOER decided in December 2016 that there will be a storage procurement target set for Massachusetts. We still don't know what the target is. The DOER has until, the DOER is the Department of Energy Resources. The DOER has until July to set these targets. So in the coming months, there will be a lot of stakeholder discussions and decisions around what target should be set for Massachusetts. But really, 2016 was a year when Massachusetts, got on the map, as it were, in terms of storage. And, lastly, a really important piece that I hinted at earlier for the behind the meter segment is ongoing discussion and policy related to net energy metering. So when it comes to solar PV, historically, there's been this option to export your excess solar energy and receive compensation, often at the retail rate, across much of the U.S. But in the past year, we've seen new policy implemented and discussions around whether NEM compensation should be removed or rolled back. And a few states where this is of interest is Hawaii. We saw the a split into the self-supply tariff, where customers can't export solar energy, and thus it encourages storage, versus the grid supply tariff, which allowed export but had a cap. And we saw the grid supply tariff actually be reached in late 2016. Additionally, in California, we saw both San Diego Gas and Electric and Pacific Gas and Electric, the three IOUs, investor-owned utilities in the state, actually reach their caps under the old net energy metering structure and switch to a new structure that has time of use rates and non-bypassable charges, which can create some improved economics for energy storage for things like time of use shifting, where a customer can store solar energy during an off-peak time and then discharge that stored energy during a peak time to lower their bill. And some other states, there have been ongoing discussions as well, Arizona and Nevada, just to name a few. So really, net energy metering legislation is something to be aware of when thinking about how customers might consider either retrofitting, or if they're going to add a solar system, adding storage as well when they do the installation to increase their self-consumption in the residential segment. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Dan Finn-Foley, who is a senior analyst with GTM Research, focusing on utility scale storage solutions. Dan, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brett. We'll come out from behind the meter now and talk a little bit about the major market developments that occurred in front of the meter segment, so focusing on utility scale and wholesale market design, et cetera. So there are two major themes that really define 2016 in my book. The first one is the Aliso Canyon gas leak and energy storage expedited procurement, and then the recent actions from the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, FERC, regarding the Milker that they just put out about participation in wholesale markets. Each of those is probably worthy of a webinar on its own, but I'll try to condense it as much as I can. Before I get into those, I want to talk about some of the other things that we're seeing in the markets as well. California is still one of the leaders in front of the meter energy storage, primarily because of the energy storage mandate that they have in that state. But there is some great cooperation there between the California ISO, the utilities, and the legislature. They all seem to be on the same page, and it really shows. In the past year, CAISO has been continually updating their non-generator resource category, allowing energy storage systems to self-manage their state of charge. They're listening, they're adapting to stakeholder feedback, and they're one of the regions where front-of-the-meter energy storage is really able to leverage its unique value proposition. The utilities are, of course, responding to the energy storage mandate and also the Aliso Canyon expedited procurement, so I'll talk about in a moment. Some interesting legislature passed, which authorized up to 500 additional megawatts on top of the original storage mandate. That's going to be a really interesting question, because what we've seen is that the utilities have happily gone up into the letter of the law when it comes to procuring energy storage. This latest authorization allows utilities to target up to an additional 500 megawatts. So this is really going to show whether utilities have the appetite for energy storage on its own, or whether it's really just been driven by the mandates from the legislature. We also had some other legislative activities going on, looking at bulk energy storage, et cetera. Legislation has cited unprecedented changes as drivers to act when working with CAISO. So in California, we really see a really significant driver for front-of-the-meter energy storage. Highlighting again on Massachusetts, the potential mandate that'll be there is going to be a significant factor as well. The state of charge report, as Brett mentioned, put out a lot of, as much as 2.28 million in benefits, billion in benefits to potential ratepayers through system improvements. But again, this is going to be a test to see how well legislature stakeholders can integrate their discussion with the ISO, in this case ISO New England, to see if we can develop new rules. And of course that ties in with the action from FERC as well. Quickly, New York, we have the 100 megawatt hour storage mandate from New York City, the distributed energy roadmap, non-wires, alternative RFPs, a lot of different pieces that are all sort of circling the same question about energy storage. And around all that is, of course, reforming RED, which is going to be a big question moving forward. Significant signposts in that market happened just this week where you're looking at Con Ed. They're looking at a pilot program in which they'll have customer-sited front-of-the-meter energy storage, which I think is going to be a really interesting look to see how utilities are considering distributed energy. If this is a business model whereby a utility can lease the space, use the resource for their own needs, bypass any sort of aggregator or behind-the-meter application, that could be something definitely worth watching. We had some movement across other markets. In Nevada, there could be potentially investigation into energy storage. There's a mandate in Oregon as well, a relatively smaller mandate of 5 megawatt hours. In Washington, there's also some clean energy fund grants of about 10.6 million, which highlighted a lot of different applications for storage and showed a variety of ways that storage can participate for grid stabilization and a really myriad of issues facing the grid there. So next slide, we can take a little bit of a deeper look into Aliso Canyon. So providing a little bit of a context for the Aliso Canyon gas leak, this was a gas leak that was first discovered in October of 2015 by SoCalGas employees. They basically found this leak and discovered that of the 86 billion cubic feet of storage in the facility, only 15 billion cubic feet of natural gas was left. That's only 17% of its total capacity. So this was a huge shortfall in a natural gas storage facility. It affected 17 different facilities comprising more than 9 gigawatts. And specifically, it affected 2 facilities that were natural gas peaker plants serving the area of about 90 megawatts. The result was that it was unclear whether California was going to have the capacity to mitigate times of high demand over the coming winter and summer months. So in May, the CPUC basically ordered SCE to undertake an expedited procurement for energy storage resources to meet that capacity shortfall. And in July of the same year, SDG&E released plans to expedite 37.5 megawatts of energy storage projects that they had previously contracted. So this was a unique opportunity. These utilities already had experience working with energy storage resources through the mandate, and thus energy storage was seen as a quick solution to this capacity shortfall problem. The timing of this was particularly impressive. From May to December, representing only about 8 months as opposed to a timeline of years, which often takes place for natural gas peaker plants. The ability to install these systems in a short time frame would be really significant to determine whether these projects could be determined as successful. There were 4 projects scheduled in FEE, 2 of which were scheduled to come online in 2016. Preliminary number shows that those 2 projects are in fact online, which is good news for the energy storage industry, showing that that expedited time frame is indeed possible. The rest are still scheduled to come online in Q1 2017, and specifically a couple at the end of this month. This is a pretty big deal because it's going to serve as a benchmark for energy storage, its ability to mitigate these kind of black swan events. This might not be something that happens frequently, but it is a signpost of an aging infrastructure, something that energy storage can definitely play a role in, especially as we're looking at infrastructure as a potential priority of the new administration. Energy storage could play a significant or even an outsized role there. There's going to be a couple benchmarks looking at success, timing, cost, reliability. Ultimately, it's going to come down to whether California ratepayers are affected by this natural gas leak. If energy storage can come in and sort of save the day, that's going to be a big deal, and energy storage is going to be taken seriously for a lot of other applications as well. So going from there, I wanted to talk very briefly about the FERC Milker, which was just put out in 2016. And this was a process that began with AD 1620, in which FERC requested comments from the various ISOs and RTOs about how their systems were designed and markets were designed to integrate energy storage resources, specifically advanced energy storage, so not so much pumped hydro, but more looking at batteries, flywheels, supercapacitors, et cetera. And the results were taken together, stakeholder process was initiated, and this past November, FERC instituted this Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which is now open up for comments. Comments are due next month. This is a pretty wide-ranging Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. I've highlighted 5 of the key items here. The first 2 are really the significant ones. It does specify that ISOs should enable energy storage resources to set the wholesale market clearing price of the wholesale seller and buyer, set the minimum size requirements, that you cannot set the minimum size to be too high, specifies that the sale of energy must be at the wholesale LMP. But 2 of the really critical things that it does here is that it states that energy storage resources must be eligible to provide capacity, energy, and ancillary services, which means that this is billions of dollars in potential market that energy storage would now be eligible for. Many ISOs are beginning to sort of work with stakeholders and develop rules that specifically enable energy storage. And you can see that in the PJM's frequency regulation market, although that's now undergoing some changes as well. And then CAISO as well has done a good job of defining energy storage resources. But other ISOs are lagging behind. And so this would sort of jumpstart that process and create a lot of new markets for energy storage to participate in. One of the wordings that may maybe put a little bit of a damper on that is the phrase technically capable of providing. That gives a little bit of an out for an ISO that maybe wants to say, well, for a capacity resource, we need you to be available at all times, 24/7, 365. Energy storage, you don't really meet that criteria because you're an energy-limited resource. That's potentially an argument that could be made. The good news is that this Notice of Proposed Rulemaking does specify that the participation models have to reflect the physical and operational characteristics of electric storage resources. That would be the fact that the state of charge management is important for them. They are energy and duration limited resources. There are a lot of ways that energy storage is unique, and they're currently not accommodated in many ISO and RTO markets. So if this moves forward and we have the, as it is right now, it would mean a really big opportunity for energy storage in the near to mid-term. There would, of course, be an implementation process and design process. This wouldn't be an immediate effect, but it could signal that over the next couple of years, we could see some real ability for energy storage to participate in wholesale markets. Simultaneously, FERC also, I think just this month, discussed the possibility of multiple value streams for energy storage resources, meaning whether an energy storage resource can provide a cost-based service, some sort of grid functionality, deferral, et cetera, while also participating in wholesale electricity markets. The precedent had generally been that if you're doing one, you sort of self-regulate yourself out of the other one. But the policy statement that FERC put out basically was a little wink saying, that's not necessarily the precedent that we want to set. We're open to other ideas. And so I think that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on as well as we move forward. And yeah, I think that covers most of what we wanted to look at for markets. So quickly, we'll go through our outlook. GTM Research forecasts out to 5 years ahead for energy storage deployments. For 2016, what we're seeing there is that this is still generally a utility scale dominated market. But a really exciting development is that by 2021, we're anticipating that more than half of deployments in the US will be behind the meter, which is going to be a really important inflection point for the market. Utility scale will, of course, still be a significant portion of that, and we're looking to see just over 2 gigs of annual deployments by 2021. Looking at the market size, it tracks pretty similarly. 2015, earlier years, driven primarily by utility scale, mostly in the PJM markets. 2016, now we're seeing some capacity applications for front of the meter and a growing prevalence of non-residential storage as well. Residential, non-residential will again start really kicking in over the next couple of years, and then by 2021, we expect the market to be over 2.8 billion. All right, and I believe that covers everything that we wanted to discuss today. We wanted to leave some time open for questions. So thank you again for your time, and we look forward to following up on anything that you're more curious about.
Great. Thank you very much, Brett and Dan, for a very good presentation. And we have a lot of really good questions queued up here. So before we start with that, I want to ask this sort of top of my mind question, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I want to ask, just from the industry's point of view, are you getting any sense of how the industry is feeling about potential for, what will the climate be like for storage under the new federal administration? I should put that in context by saying that, over the past years we've seen that while there's no sort of overarching federal energy storage, development plan or energy plan, for that matter, really, there are a number of ways in which there's been an impact through DOE funding for research and development and for market building and deployment, through national laboratory work, through the federal ITC, through FERC, as you mentioned. So I'm curious whether you have a sense from the industry of where that might go, and if there's a sense that support will continue, if not, that other maybe states will step up more, or what's the temperature reading that you're getting?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a question that's on just about everybody's mind. I'm not sure if our webinar listeners are aware, but there actually is a new administration in Washington. Really big news just breaking here at GTM Research. The implications of that are pretty staggering and wide-reaching, and it is difficult to sort of encompass all the different trends that we're seeing right now, but there are a couple of signposts that you can point to as the industry sort of has their finger in the wind. I'll talk about it from my side for a little bit for the wholesale applications, utility front-of-the-meter applications. One thing to note is that the FERC policy statement that I pointed out regarding precedent for multiple use applications passed in a meeting in a 2-to-1 vote. The one dissenting vote, Cheryl LaFleur, is going to be the head of the commissioner of FERC moving forward. That could be a bit of a signpost that maybe this isn't as friendly an environment as we believe. I think it'll be more utility focused. If that's the case, then we could see that energy storage is in a good position. If the Aliso Canyon procurements go well, utilities are obviously interested in this, from the Con Ed projects that I discussed to California to procurements that we're seeing in Arizona, et cetera. This is something that clearly utilities are interested in, if not pursuing directly, then looking into pilot programs, et cetera. There was one other thing I wanted to mention regarding that, but yeah.
I mean, I can jump in, and I think Dan, what you might have been getting at too is that even behind the meter, we are seeing utilities increasingly turn to storage to fulfill different value streams. So I mentioned earlier the BQDM project in New York, where we're seeing Con Edison actually say, look, we're going to use non-traditional resources to defer the need to upgrade a substation. So I mean, if nothing else, if the economics are there, if the economics are superior, there is certainly potential. And we are seeing an increasing number of utilities actually do pilot programs, procurements to replace missing capacity. Additionally, you look at states like Massachusetts, where now there will be some sort of storage target in the future. And so I think the thing to look for over the next couple of years is to look where there will be leadership taken, maybe not at the federal level, but at maybe either but at the state or the or even the local level, since as Dan mentioned earlier, even New York City recently set a goal of 100 megawatt hours of storage by 2020. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that to keep an eye on the local level action.
Yeah, absolutely. State level is going to continue to drive things. And I remember the one other point I wanted to make was regarding the incoming administration. It's not your traditional sort of fiscal conservative Republican that we're looking at here. There's talk of broad and expensive infrastructure spending. And a look at some of the reports around the infrastructure spending has renewable energy, highways, and yes, even grid modernization and energy storage front and center as part of that infrastructure plan. If this is something that the traditionally fiscally conservative Senate and Congress can come together on, then that could be really great news for energy storage at any scale. It also seems like the administration also is listening to business leaders, including from Tesla, and that could be a big factor as well in determining what way the wind is blowing in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have, as I said, a bunch of really good questions, so I'm going to encourage somewhat briefer answers so that we can get to as many as possible. And so the first one is going back to that FERC NOPR that you mentioned on barrier removal and aggregation. The question is, should this be if this were to be challenged on a jurisdictional basis, would the prior Supreme Court 845 ruling on distributed resources pricing set precedents? Or I don't know if you can answer that. Do we know?
Wow.
On-demand response, I'm sorry. Was the previous ruling was on-demand response.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can really point to precedent with that regard. FERC's jurisdiction on this kind of thing is pretty clear, and a lot of the ISOs are already beginning to implement these kinds of changes. As I mentioned, CAISO with their non-generator resource, PJM in their frequency regulation market. On a recent PJM markets call, they basically said that in their response to this FERC NOPR, they're going to suggest that they are already in compliance with most of what this NOPR has to offer. So if it was challenged in court, I'm not sure that you can really point to that argument as precedent, but that's definitely something that's worth looking into, and especially the Supreme Court wondering how they would come down on it as well.
Okay, great.
Again,
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a couple of questions on battery costs, and so I'm going to present them together. One is an approximate I guess current installed cost per kilowatt hour, fully installed. And then the other related question is, how do you see price trends over the next year?
Sure, yeah, and that's a fair question, and it's something that we get a lot, and we actually do have every quarter we track what we see as price trends, fully installed system price trends. For utility scale, we look at both systems, 2-hour systems deployed for energy applications, and then shorter duration, 15 to 30-minute systems deployed for power applications, as well as behind-the-meter systems. So I'm not going to get too in the weeds, given that it's actually part of our paid subscription product, but I'll share some of the median numbers that we have. And again, keep in mind that this is from our previous energy storage monitor, so we will have an updated report coming in early March, which might see some slight declines on some of these numbers. So looking at storage for those energy applications I mentioned, the 2-hour fully installed utility scale system, we're seeing a median of about $800 per kilowatt hour. And then for the power applications, we're seeing a median of about $900 per kilowatt. And Dan, do you want to add any color on some of possibly the effects that something like the Aliso Canyon procurement might have on these? Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's some rumors around the water cooler about the Aliso Canyon procurements. Obviously, those are all confidential, but there's a general sense that these were priced pretty aggressively as far as projects go, and I think that we'll see that trend continuing in the future. As we move forward, if there are different ISO markets open up to energy storage, those could have been priced to move because the companies that have projects in the ground are going to have an advantage in the future when bidding on projects if markets open up again. So I think Aliso Canyon was a pretty big signpost that these total system costs are dropping pretty significantly. Also that lithium ion specifically is falling in cost pretty dramatically over the past couple of years.
Great, thank you. So here's a question regarding, again, the FERC NOPR. If an energy storage system is participating in the wholesale market but is connected on the distribution system, how will the electric distribution company be compensated for use of their assets?
Oh, wow. So if it's participating in the market but it's on the distribution system, how will the distribution company be compensated? I think that if you know the answer to that question, then you can you can preclude a couple of different conversations that are happening at FERC right now. The business models and value streams around energy storage providing multiple uses, or even operating on one system while taking advantage of a distribution system, are all really being discussed right now. There's sort of new territory in that regard, so I believe, as far as I know, those things are still being worked out. There is going to be some sort of compensation system in place for anything like that, the mechanisms of which I don't think have been entirely determined. And there may be, again, some difference in how the rule that FERC puts out is implemented in these cases. So basically a long way of saying that it's unclear right now.
Okay. Another question regarding FERC. This person wants to know, do entities like TVA, BPA, and NYPA fall under FERC jurisdiction? And then comments, if they don't, their ICAP hinders any technical solutions that get proposed. So I don't know if you can sort of illuminate us as to whether they're under FERC jurisdiction, and also what is the ICAP issue there?
Yeah, of course. So the FERC jurisdiction that we're really talking about with regards to the NOPR are the ISOs that are across state lines. So you have CAISO, PJM, ISO New England, paradoxically New York ISO, SPP, and MISO. I think that's all of them there. Don't have the list in front of me. ERCOT, of course, being within a single state, does not qualify, won't be under jurisdiction. So when we're looking at individual utility districts, I don't really believe that they will be affected. Now, if there's an individual utility district that is also in the footprint of an ISO, then again, there would be that overlap in place. So I'm not really familiar enough with the UCAP that you're talking about there to see if that really would provide a barrier, but with all those interactions taking place between the utilities, the ISOs, et cetera, that's definitely a possibility. But I think that most areas are going to be following the blueprint of California, in which the utilities, the legislature, the Public Utility Commission are working very closely with the ISO to sort of develop these rules to make sure that things are working properly. So I imagine that that'll be a focus in the future.
Yep, I think the question was with regard to authorities like the Tennessee Valley Authority and NYPA and BPA. Are they, do you know if they're under FERC jurisdiction?
Off the top of my head, no. I believe, I don't think that this one would really affect that, because the FERC NOPR, I believe, is limited to just areas that are under organized ISO footprint. So I don't believe that the TVA or any of those would qualify.
Okay, thank you. So I want to turn to some questions about behind-the-meter systems and markets. And there's a couple of related questions here on the residential market. One person is wondering why the residential market is such a slow growth market when there is such demand. And another person is wondering what's driving the hundreds of megawatts of residential deployment that you're showing for 2021. So I guess there's a kind of almost a disconnect here. So what is the cause of slow growth for residential systems, and what would cause it to pick up dramatically?
Yeah, no, and Todd, that's a great question. That's a very fair question. So the real issue today is there aren't really any monetizable value streams for residential storage. So, if you're trying to get a financier to back one of these systems, there's nothing that's really making these systems, monetizable. Today, generally what, these systems are purchased to serve is something like backup power for a customer, who's worried about a grid outage, or a customer who, wants to be, more energy independent. The issue there is that, there's, you can't really monetize backup power. And additionally, even just looking at the pure economics, backup generators are cheaper than storage, much cheaper, in fact, than residential storage today. There are other use cases you can have for residential storage. For instance, time of use shifting, where you're storing energy at the off-peak times and then discharging it from the battery at the peak times. There's sometimes, generally demand charges are only assessed on commercial and industrial customers, but increasingly we are seeing conversations in a few jurisdictions where there are residential demand charges, but even then, demand charge management isn't necessarily, a key monetizable value stream. And then lastly, there is this opportunity to aggregate behind-the-meter systems for grid services. And that's the one that I want to focus on the answer to the second question. So, increasingly there are utilities that are performing pilot projects that involve networking multiple behind-the-meter energy storage systems together and using them to, reduce peak or serve some sort of, some sort of ancillary service. And we're still seeing this, in only a handful of deployments today, but it's becoming increasingly popular and increasingly talked about. For instance, earlier I mentioned California's preferred resources pilot, and actually 5 megawatts, 20 megawatt hours of residential systems were awarded under that program. It was the only residential award. There's only that one, but nevertheless, it's heartening to see that there are examples where there is this opportunity to network multiple systems. So when we look at going forward, there will be this opportunity for these systems to be deployed for those types of value streams, and in that case, you can actually see a monetizable value for these behind-the-meter systems.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the FERC Milker that I mentioned regarding wholesale market participation for energy storage was really two Milkers in one. The second one is the same question, but for aggregation of distributed energy storage resources as well. So they wanted to ensure that that availability was there for any sort of aggregating systems into wholesale energy markets. So it is a significant opportunity.
Right. Well, thank you. And that actually kind of brings me to another question that I wanted to ask. You kind of touched on this on your presentation, and again just now, the concept of what people are calling a virtual power plant, or an aggregated set of behind-the-meter storage systems that could be drawn on by a utility at various times to reduce peak and provide other services that have value, and then in some way, the customer being compensated for that. We're seeing that here in Vermont with Green Mountain Power having a program, and of course there's a few other examples. Are you getting any sense that, what we're seeing here, I think, is that in ISO New England, the utilities really can save quite a bit of money by reducing their peak demand during ISO-wide system peaks to cut down on their capacity and transmission costs. And I understand that that's also true in some of the neighboring ISOs, but across the country, we really don't have much of a sense of that. Is that driving some of this in the same way in California, and do you know what's going on in the rest of the country with regard to that sort of aggregation of behind-the-meter systems to reduce utility costs?
Sure, yeah. So what I'll say is, again, this is still something that's in the earlier stages. We are still very much in the pilot project phase. And, you asked about projects that are going on beyond California. You mentioned one being Green Mountain Power in Vermont. Con Edison in New York is engaging in a pilot program now. And actually, in fact, also in Kentucky, Glasgow EPB is already in the process of doing a program called Infotricity that uses standalone energy storage, among other different types of technology, to do a virtual power plant. So, really there are these conversations ongoing, but it's still, it still is a handful of cases today, right? But as these pilot projects, show results and positive results at that, it can be expected that more players will pursue them. And, there are a few other utilities that are in these sorts of conversations, but I don't think those have been publicly announced. But I will say that, beyond the traditional states, there are utilities that are considering these options.
And just one quick note, I would bring up again the Con Ed program where they're looking to have customer-sited front-of-the-meter applications. When you're looking at a utility's appetite to have aggregated distributed energy behind the meter, I think that that's clearly, as Brett mentioned, something that a lot of them are pursuing. Con Ed's indicating that maybe they want to own the distribution in addition to having it in front of the meter. So that could be something to keep your eye on as well if the utilities sort of want to horn in on this space themselves.
Great, thank you. A couple of quick questions here. With most of the battery capacity being installed in the U.S. depending on imports, in other words, batteries manufactured outside the country, and should we expect any changes in terms of increased costs due to restrictions, tariffs on imports, capacity constraints perhaps?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And to be honest, Dan and my coverage of the energy storage market is actually more downstream. So we're more concerned with policies, deployments, business models, actual operational characteristics of these systems. Of course, the energy storage supply chain is something we're aware of, and that is crucially important. But to be honest, neither of us really has a deep visibility into energy storage supply chain.
Okay, terrific. So on the, somebody wants to know, in light of the VDER ruling by the New York Public Service Commission, this is the Value of Distributed Energy Resources ruling. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'm not familiar enough with it to really explain it. So I guess the question is, are you familiar enough with it to speak to this? The question is, do you think solar projects smaller than 2 megawatts should include storage?
So I've done some reading on the the VDR proceeding, and there's still a lot of questions around that proceeding, and I think a lot more questions than answers as comment periods continue. In terms of should solar projects 2 megawatts or under include storage, I mean, I think it depends, right? Obviously, if you shouldn't add storage to a system to just add storage. There should be a reason for it, and particularly if you want financiers to back the project, there needs to be a clear, economic value and a clear use case for the system. So I think it's impossible to say across the board yes or no. It's really going to depend on the case when it comes to the systems. And again, that 2 megawatt solar system, is that something that's in front of the meter? Is it behind the meter? What state is it being deployed in? Though in this case, I suppose you're asking about New York, but there's a lot of questions that have to be answered about the specific use case before you answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. Here's a question about efficiencies. When do you think we could see battery storage hit 100 kilowatt hours and 80% efficiency with a 3600 cycle lifetime?
Yeah, to kind of go back to an answer that I gave two questions ago, that's further upstream than Dan and my coverage. Again, our focus area is a little more downstream. So while we are aware of different technology characteristics of different companies, that's less of our focus area.
Okay. Can you speak to what's being installed in terms of residential storage? Somebody is asking, is it Tesla Powerwalls? Are there other, we know, for example, Sonnen is a German company that seems to be trying to break into the U.S. market. Do you know what's being installed behind the meter for residential storage?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies active, and obviously I can't share the actual size of any deployments that each company has, given that that's confidential information. But I'll just rattle off some of the players in the residential space. You mentioned Tesla. They get a lot of press. They're very very good at marketing themselves. Sonnen's another one. They've had a lot of success in the German market, and now they're active in the U.S. Recently, Mercedes-Benz has entered the residential storage market, and they're making a concerted push on that front. Sunverge is another one that they've engaged a number of VPP pilot projects. Earlier, I mentioned that Glasgow project and that Kentucky project. Those are just two of the examples. Enphase, who they've done a lot of work in the solar space, are now offering a modular energy storage solution. We're seeing other providers like JLM Energy that actually just yesterday announced a new microstorage product that they're active in the residential space. Taguchi Electric, there's really a lot of companies that are active in the residential market today, and they all have different amounts that they're doing, but nevertheless there is a diversity of players and offerings in that segment.
Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, we've reached our time limit, and I apologize to the folks who sent in questions we did not get to, but we did our best, and I think that we've we've had a really fantastic turnout for this webinar and a really great presentation and discussion. So thanks very much to Brett and Dan from GTM Research. We have contact information on the screen, including the link to our webinar archive if you'd like to review the webinar at a later time, look at the slides, and our websites, web pages for our energy storage program. And Samantha, do we have upcoming events that you'd like to announce?
We do. We have a webinar coming up next month about the American Samoa Solar Plus Storage Microgrid. That's in the middle of February, and I would encourage everyone to go to our website, check that webinar out.
Okay. So thanks everybody. We'll see you next time, and thanks again to Brett and Dan.